Time to get aboard the Chuba Hubbard train. This is Krown Gridiron Nation on TSN. Welcome everybody to the Hubcast studios here in Vancouver. I'm Jim Mullen, he's Gord Randall, and yes, Mike Hogan will join us in just a bit. More on that kid from Sherwood Park in Alberta in just a second, but let's roll through our 2-minute offense to see what was going on with Canadians in the NCAA. 10th ranked Notre Dame hosting number 18 Virginia. The Cavs gave the Irish a scare in this one. Virginia led 17-14 at the half, but the Irish's defense came to play in the second, en route to a 35-20 win. Abbotsford Chase Claypool finished with 6 catches for 30 yards, and the Cavs' Terrell Jana from Burnaby hauled in 4 for 23. Penn State, Maryland, those Nittany Lions almost put up a 60-burger. 59 will do. The big story, this one, the defense. The Canadian 3 gave up 0. Ottawa's Jonathan Sutherland and Jesse Lukita, along with Brampton's Daniel Joseph, combined for 10 tackles. Penn State now 4-0. The Oklahoma Sooners continue to put up the points against whomever they play. This week, the Texas Tech Red Raiders were the victims. Neville Gallimore out of Ottawa had a quiet day, but he did force a big fumble later on. Number 20 Michigan beat up on Rutgers, putting 52 up on the Scarlet Knights while allowing a Cobb 0. A Canadian on that Wolverine defense, defensive end and Ottawa native Luigi Villan got on the stat sheet with a tackle. Minnesota remains undefeated after a touchdown win over Purdue in Big Ten play. Corner Benjamin St-Juste from Montreal had himself a gain, finishing with 3 tackles, 1 for a loss, and 2 pass breakups for those Golden Gophers. It's the Bayou Directional Bowl, Southeastern Louisiana taking on Northwestern State. No problems for the Lions in this one as they walk away with a 44-27 win. Isaac Berglund continues to impress, leading the defense with 4 tackles and 2 TFLs for the Lions. We'll talk to him later in the show. Cincinnati Bearcats Marshall Thundering Herd. The Bearcats win this one 52-14. Cincinnati tight end and Lachine, Quebec native Bruno Labelle with his first tutty of the year from 5 yards out. It's OK State versus number 25 Kansas State. This game was all about Sherwood Park's Chuba Hubbard, the nation's leading rusher. 296 on the ground, big plays all day long. The score doesn't tell the story. This one was not close. The Cowboys get the W, and for the first time this season are ranked in the top 25 at number 21. So, Mike, let's put Chuba Hubbard aside for a second because we are going to talk about him in just a few minutes. What are your other impressions from this past week in the NCAA?
Well, the one game that I was really curious about was the matchup of the big Canadian receivers as Virginia took on Notre Dame. We've all talked all season long about Chase Claypool at Notre Dame, and Terrell Jana has really come onto the scene at Virginia. But I think if you watched that game, you came away a little bit or a lot disappointed. Jana only had 4 catches, just 23 yards. That was his lowest output of the season. And Claypool was held to just 5 catches for 30 yards. Problem is, there's obviously something wrong with him. He was limping around pretty obviously. The reports were that it was an ankle injury. So if you were looking for a big offensive show out of that game from the Canadian receivers, you were probably disappointed. But the game itself was pretty entertaining.
Gord, we don't talk nearly enough about the Penn State 3, do we? This is your opportunity to do so.
Yeah, sounds good, and I can talk about all 3 of them a little bit in Daniel Joseph, Jonathan Sutherland, and Jesse Lukita. I'll focus on Jesse Lukita, though, and a guy at a university that has long been called LBU for Linebacker University. Jesse Lukita is establishing himself as one of their top linebackers this year and was tied for the team lead in tackles this past week, 5 tackles for Lukita. He's becoming more and more prominent as the season progresses for the Nittany Lions, who are at 4-0 and now 12th ranked in the nation. So they've got a couple more weeks before their schedule really picks up. They get Purdue this week, and then they get into the difficult part of their schedule, starting with, I believe, Iowa in 2 weeks' time. That will be the real litmus test for these Lions if they want to take a shot at a Big Ten championship this year.
So, will we see Lukita in our Stateside 5? In at number 5, he's a permanent resident on this list. Oklahoma's Neville Gallimore, 3 tackles, a TFL, a forced fumble, and 2 quarterback hurries in that big win over Texas Tech. At 4, the sharpest knife in the drawer, Keenan Clark from Cornell, the junior defensive back out of Pickering, with 2 tackles in his first interception of the year. Unfortunately, Cornell loses to Yale. It's Ottawa's own Jesse Lukita out of Penn State, one of the Canadian 3. 5 tackles and a pass breakup in that blanking of Maryland. Sam Emilus is back in the 5 for the second time this year. The Montreal native with 6 grabs for 70 yards in that 37-29 win over Akron. In at number 1, you might as well call Gridiron Nation Chuba Vision. There's Chuba Hubbard ripping it up for another plus 200-yard game, almost 3 with 296 on the day in that win over Kansas State. Okay, now it is Chuba Hubbard time, and for the sake of discussion, let's take a look at another couple of great Canadian running backs who did get Heisman votes. Let's roll that board. Ruben Mays back in 1984, over 1,600 yards for Wasu, and that record-setting game of 357 versus Oregon. Tim Biakabatuka back in 95, he was 8th in Heisman voting. 18-18 in a season. He had a 313-yard game versus Ohio State. And Gord, you can see how Chuba Hubbard is on track to match those numbers. But does he need to have a game like Biakabatuka did to get into that discussion for a top 5 finish in the Heisman as a sophomore?
I would say that he probably does. And one thing that's big to note about Biakabatuka's big game is who it came against Ohio State, their biggest and most bitter rival in the Big Ten. And that really is going to be the math for Chuba Hubbard as well, as they finish the season with Bedlam against the University of Oklahoma, and a lot's going to come down to that performance for him. He's going to need to be prominent and be one of the bright stars if he's going to make a strong case to be in New York.
I think Chuba Hubbard's going to be considered for the Heisman. He might be the front runner right now, and it's great to hear Ruben Mays' name because I haven't heard that name in so long. But if you go one recruiting class after him, I think we're talking about still the man who's the best ever player to come out of the NCAA as a Canadian out of Oakville, Ontario. And if Hubbard has the same kind of year that he's started already, he may be in the discussion with Tony Mandrich out of Michigan State, whose pro record certainly didn't equal that of his NCAA career. In his senior year, he had over 50 pancake blocks and didn't allow a sack all season. He went to the combine, he had 39 lifts of 2 1/4 and ran a 4.6540 at 330 pounds. He ended up with 3 first place votes for the Heisman. And it's funny that we're kind of comparing him today to Chuba Hubbard. When he lost the Heisman, Mandrich did, he lost it to another Oklahoma State running back, a guy named Barry Sanders.
When we come back, we will roll through U Sports and we will check out our kid in the bayou. Stick around.
In British Columbia's Similkameen Valley, our partner Sunny Dhaliwal and his family grow and pack some of the finest fruit you will ever taste. Thank you, Sunny, for making Krown produce fresh at its best.
Time to check out the Gridiron Nation through the home and native land in our 3-minute warning. Let's start in the late going at IG Field in Winnipeg. Des Cotillier with 20 seconds left connects with Brendan Njokes. That gets it into Matt Riley field goal range. There's Riley from 39 yards out. He pulls it off. It's a 1-point win for those Bisons. Western Windsor, Chris Merchant is back after that 9-point effort against Guelph. This time 58 on the board. He went 340 through the air with 4 touchdown passes. A blowout in the border town. Waterloo now moves to 4-1. There goes Tyrell Ford with his second pick of the year to the house. This one went 70 yards. Dion Pellerin on the ground contributed 155 and 3 trips to the promised land. York yorking it up at 0-6. Those Laurier Golden Hawks with an inspired effort after that Ottawa implosion 2 weeks ago. It was all about big plays and steady D for WLU. They win by 36 over the Tricolor. The Guelph Griffins have a D to be feared. Graham Brody led the way on defense with this 68-yard pick to the house. Theo Landers improving every week. 286 yards, 2 touchdowns, both strikes to Keon Schaefer-Baker. 4-2 those Griffins are. Ottawa falls to 3-2 heading to the Panda. Acadia in Lennoxville to take on Bishops. They move to 5-0 with a win over those Purple guys. Hunter Gennard with 298 yards passing and a TD pass to Glodin Mulally, former Team Canada world champion. Last but not least, Saskatoon was upset central. The Huskies defeat the Dinos by 14. Adam Matcher with 171 yards on the ground, a TD, and he also caught one and toted it into the end zone. First Dinos regular season loss since a meaningless end of season one to Alberta in 2017. That is a 12-game streak that is snapped. Well, there you see the week that was in U Sports. What are your impressions coming out of the OUA and more specifically Guelph, Mike?
Yeah, I can't tell you how impressed I am with their defense right now. At the beginning of the season, if you had have had me handicap the OUA, Western would have been the alpha dog, and then the two teams that I thought had maybe the best shot of pulling off the upset would be Waterloo based on their explosive offense alone, and maybe the best rounded team was Ottawa. Well, Guelph has played those three teams in the last 3 weeks. They held that explosive offense of the Warriors to 13 points. They held Western to 9 points, and last week they held Ottawa to 6 points. Guelph is now doing it against the biggest teams in the conference, and boy, if they can get their offense really in gear, and they put up a lot of points last week, but if they can continue that kind of offensive success, they have a legitimate shot of knocking off Western for the Yates Cup.
So, if you want to play in the NCAA and you are sitting in Nova Scotia, how do you go about doing that? Well, you skip your way into Quebec and play in CEGEP, then you get discovered, then you find your way down to Southeastern Louisiana University. That's exactly what Isaac Berglund has done. He's now a senior down there and the leader of their defense with the Lions, and he joins us right now. Isaac, welcome to Gridiron Nation on TSN.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Isaac, as we were mentioning, I'm not sure if there's a player that's taken a longer route to get from Canada down to the NCAA, starting in Nova Scotia, going through CEGEP in Lennoxville, and then somehow landing down at Southeastern Louisiana University. Tell us about your journey.
I've learned a lot from each stop. Obviously, there's big jumps in between each of those. But, you know, in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, I learned that I love this game. And when I got to Quebec, I learned that there was a lot more to this game than just chasing the football. And when I got down here to Hammond, Louisiana, I learned just how many doors football can open for just a small-town Canadian kid.
How did you take charge of your own recruiting process? How did you get your game into the faces of college recruiters across the United States?
This is a pretty good question. I don't get asked a lot. In the recruiting process, it was hard, obviously, because I stayed in Canada. I didn't go over to the States. But there was about 30 or so computers that I had, and I used to get my friends, my teammates, to log into each computer, and we would put my highlight tape on repeat, just so I could get the views up, so all the coaches would see that my highlight tape had a lot of views. Other things I would do is I would DM coaches on Twitter until they blocked me. I really wouldn't take no for an answer. I used to check staff directories online and get the coaches' phone numbers. I would call, pretend to be my parents. I would do a lot of crazy things, and I just wouldn't take no for an answer.
How would you describe your game? Who are you between the lines?
I would describe my game as disruptive. Between the lines, I feel like I'm a soldier. I feel like I'm an anchor in the run game. I feel like I help my teammates do the right thing. But most importantly, I feel like I'm a player multiplier. I just want to make everybody around me better. So if that depends on me getting in the right gap, so somebody else can make the play, then that's what I want to do.
You're a guy from Nova Scotia. What sort of impression has Louisiana left on you in your life?
It's a lifelong impression. The city, the town, the teachers, the coaches, the teammates. Lifelong impression. I feel like Hammond, Louisiana will always be a forever home.
When we come back, 3 games to watch coming up this week on both sides of the border. Stick around.
From the Similkameen Valley in British Columbia to the Western Cape of South Africa, our global network of grower partners produce the finest fruits and vegetables for Canadians. Those partners make Krown produce fresh at its best.
There it is, our top 5 high school teams in the nation, according to CanadaFootballChat.com. Welcome back to the Hubcast studios in Vancouver, everyone. Time to look ahead at 3 games that we have selected, 2 in the United States, 1 in Canada in our game previews. Ohio, Buffalo. Yes, this is the most Canadian game we have in the NCAA. 5 homebrews on Buffalo, 4 on Ohio, including 2-time Cornish Trophy winner Nathan Rourke, who was 1-1 versus the Bulls. So is the opening game of the MAC season a must-win for Nathan Rourke in Ohio against Buffalo?
No, the opening game of your conference schedule is just about never going to be a must-win. That being said, however, Buffalo has been one of Ohio's chief rivals the last number of years. Nathan Rourke has had really good games against Buffalo and has had some poorer games against Buffalo as well. Buffalo lost to open conference play last week while Ohio was off. Ohio with a 1-3 record coming in could use the victory for their overall record, but the reality is that it's a clean slate right now for the Bobcats. They would love to get off on the right foot in their MAC schedule this weekend as they take on the Bulls, but must win it isn't at this point.
The biggest regular season game in Canada, it's the Panda game, Carleton, Ottawa. This game might be the Yates Cup for both of these teams. Last year, Ottawa broke Carleton's 4-year reign with a win in the 50th edition of this game.
Happy Panda Week. Really looking forward to this game because this game has really significant playoff implications. Right now, Ottawa's at 3-2, Carleton's at 2-3, and we expected this to be kind of the Sawyer-Bittner-Michael Arruda matchup. If you're looking at this in the offseason, Arruda walks away from the sport, Bittner's injured, so you get the battle of the backups right now. Maybe Tanner DeJong has a little bit of an advantage at this stage over Ben Miracle, but this game has gigantic playoff implications. You've got Ottawa, Carleton, and Laurier. One of those teams is going to miss the playoffs. The loser of this game may come back to cost them a playoff spot because of the tiebreaker implications of postseason. So the Panda game is usually an exciting game. This could be an absolutely gigantic game come season's end.
Texas Tech, Oklahoma State. The Red Raiders lead this all-time series 22-21. More importantly, the Pokes want to live up to their newly found number 21 national ranking. Chuba Hubbard leading the nation by 284 yards after just 5 games. So the next station on the Chuba Hubbard Express is Lubbock, Texas. Does he continue to roll?
The bustling metropolis of Lubbock, Texas. I would say that we can probably anticipate that he will continue to roll. I don't know how big his numbers are going to be because I also don't know how close the game's going to be. But you can never sleep in that conference. There's always upset potential. And the Cowboys should be fired up going into this one. They're ranked for the first time this season at 21 in the nation. And they want to keep that positive momentum rolling as their schedule gradually builds up to that Bedlam game I alluded to earlier.
Coming up, it's our Weekend Warriors. You're going to want to stick around for that.
Every down, pass, rush, and kick brings us closer together. This is how we play. Here is why we play. It takes a team to play football, and it takes Football Canada to help keep amateur players in the game, from playgrounds to stadiums.
Yes, more than a couple of changes in our Power 7. Western still leads the pack. Montreal, after that middling effort versus Concordia, drops to 3. Mac still in the middle of it. Alberta moves up. A very injured Calgary team's in 6 and Guelph's in 7. Well, now that you're back this week, the Weekend Warriors go over to you, Mike.
For Laurier, one of the best players on defense was Sam Acheampong, who is going to be looked at big time by CFL scouts this year. He's 6'5", he's 270. He had a couple of sacks, he had a couple of tackles for a loss, and because of the necessity for the Golden Hawks to win that game, and because Acheampong stepped up and really played well, I'm going to give him my weekend warrior.
Well, fellas, my weekend warrior is Benjamin St. Juste at the University of Minnesota. Now, Benjamin is a grad transfer. He's currently working on his master's degree, and he's in the unusual, somewhat unique circumstance of being a grad transfer with 3 years of eligibility still remaining. And he finally got involved for Minnesota, his most active game of the year, 3 tackles, 1 for a loss, a couple pass breakups. Nothing overwhelming on the line, but guys, we talk about gritty, determined performances. This is a guy that at one point last offseason, Michigan, before he transferred, announced that he was medically retired because of a really bad hamstring injury. He has worked all the way back from that, and because he's doing that while also juggling a second degree program, I think he is more than fitting of being my weekend warrior.
My weekend warrior is an entire high school football team. Clarkson Football North went down to Ohio, took on the number 3 ranked team in the state, the number 28 team in the United States, and pulled out a Hail Mary upset at the end of the game against St. Ignatius. Here's Quincy Vaughn finding Nate DeMontenac for the win, 41-40. Clarkson Football North, you are my weekend warrior. Triple W 2K, double pistols to that guy there.
My Triple W 2K is, are we not quacking enough about the Oregon Ducks? All of a sudden, the top-ranked team in the Pac-12 at 13th in the nation. They are at 3-1. Their only loss, a 6-point neutral site loss to Auburn on opening weekend. And Javon Holland and his boys have been rolling with Justin Herbert at the quarterback position as well. They host California this upcoming weekend, and all signs point towards a showdown looming in a few weeks' time as they travel up to Seattle to take on the Washington Huskies with the likely Pac-12 North Championship on the line in that one. My Triple W2K is, should we be paying more attention to those Ducks in Eugene?
Guys, here's what I want to know. I want to know when U Sports is going to give up the computer as the main component of the top 10 list. This week, the U Sports computer had not 1, but 2 AUS teams in the top 10, and that's ridiculous. This team over the last 3 bowl games has been outscored by an average of 65-9. You're telling me that SMU, the second best team in the AUS, could beat the third best team in Can West? Not likely. Not going to happen.
My Triple W2K is all about Alberta. Does the clock strike midnight for Alberta with Calgary coming off that loss against Saskatchewan? Or do they take advantage of the Calgary Dinos' injuries and get their destiny in their hands to possibly get first place going into the playoffs? That's what I want to know. If you want more Canadian college talk, as always, our podcast is available on various platforms. But for now, this is Jim Mullen saying, let's get out to the game.